following Thursday's British referendum vote to leave the EU. An online petition has grown to over 3 million signatures, calling now for a second referendum. Any petition with 100,000 signatures receives a hearing in Parliament. Could we see a second British referendum? I want to bring in senior economic consultant for Euro-Pacific Capital and a former member of the British Parliament, John Browne. John, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good to see you, Maria.
What's your take? Would we actually see a second referendum?
I don't think. I think it's almost impossible. I mean, socialists always have a problem with losing gracefully. They always want reruns and change rules. And here they're doing it again. You would never have a Kentucky Derby winner if there was reruns all the time. And no shares would reflect real price if everyone with a losing trade was allowed to void their trades. So I don't think it's going to be possible because, first of all, it never happens on a referendum in Britain. Secondly, Cameron knows that his party, as a majority of his party, was pro-Brexit. And therefore, if he even looked like he was agreeing with a rerun, he would lose. Over half his voters would flood to UKIP. And the Conservatives would certainly lose the next election. So I don't think it has a chance.
So you think that the people, when they voted to leave, they knew what they were voting for, this is what they wanted? Because there's this debate right now that they voted and they weren't really sure what they were voting for.
Yeah, well, I mean, the BBC has a lot of huge loans made by the EU, and of course its reporters love to seek out people that didn't want to leave. I mean, I've had it in my constituency. Anybody against John Browne? Yes, come and vote. You're for him? No, I don't want to listen. And so the Vox Pops is heavily skewed to dissent because the BBC doesn't agree with it either.
I see.
And
John, here's Governor Huckabee.
John, I loved what you said about the Kentucky Derby, but how did David Cameron so completely miss the sentiment of voters in the country where he's prime minister?
Well, Mike, good to hear you again. And I agree with all you've said up to now. Basically, he's part of the globalist elite, the Anglo-American, particularly globalist elite. And that elite is very insulated, very protected with people with armed guards and all that sort of, flying in private jets, very removed from the people. And he was totally out of touch. And he paid attention to the financial center of London, which is part of the global elite, and of New York. And they were completely out of touch with the real feelings of real people who, as you've said before, were totally against this rule by remote, not government, an unelected, undemocratic government which was socialist, and people are fed up with it. And he got that all wrong.
John, what do you predict for your economy over there now as a result of this? What do you think? Where do you think things are going to go?
Well, I think in the short term there's going to be a lot of nervousness as these huge speculative trades by the financial elite are unwound, some of them calling for margin calls, which drives prices even further down as people sell to meet those calls. And so in the short term, great nervousness, great volatility. In the medium term, I think there will be increasing calm and increasing realization that the problem is not really with sterling, it's with the euro. And then in the longer term, freedom and enterprise will lead Britain to flourish as it did under the blessed Margaret Thatcher. And therefore, I think people will come to realize that Britain, free of the shackles of the European Union and able to trade worldwide freely with the United States. There's no EU trade agreement with the United States, China or Japan. Britain will be free to trade with the rest of the world on its own terms instead of these heavily secluded terms that the EU negotiates that favor Germany and France. They're not Britain's services industry. Wow. And so Britain will flourish. And sterling will climb rapidly.
And will we see a recession in the EU?
I think you may see recession even in Britain. I think even in the world we were heading for recession anyway. It only took one of these black swans to happen to drive the world into recession. I think that's going to happen in the EU, in Britain and in the rest of the world. But it'll be temporary.
John, thanks so much. Great insights as always from you. Appreciate your time this morning. John Browne joining us.